talk more about the reaction in the world of sports to the Arizona law. We're joined by Dave Zirin. He's the author of a number of books about politics and sports. His latest is A People's History of Sports in the United States. He's a regular contributor to The Nation magazine, writes a weekly column called Edge of Sports. Welcome, Dave. So talk about Dave Nash. Talk about the game last night, Los Suns, Steve Nash, and talk about the other athletes who are taking a stand here.
Amy, anybody who believes that sports cannot be an effective platform for social justice need only to have watched the game last night, and they would have been forever changed. I mean, the broadcast alone last night, it started with one of the NBA reporters outside the arena covering a civil rights march that was taking place outside the arena. And then the in-studio hosts, Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley, Chris Webber, all former players, took turns taking shots at Governor Jan Brewer and the law. And Chris Webber, former player, even cited By the Time I Get to Arizona and John McCain and his former support for boycotting the holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King. So it's politicized this entire arena. And what Suns did yesterday is entirely without precedent.
Dave, for 1 second, on the commentators,
yes,
I happened to listen to that pregame discussion, and I was especially struck by Charles Barkley, the legendary former star who actually played in Phoenix. So he was a big figure in Arizona for many years, condemning it as racial profiling. And I was struck by how strong these athletes and former athletes, especially in basketball. We're not even talking here about the Latino ball players in baseball, but we're talking about the major African-American and white stars in basketball have stepped up to the plate on this issue.
Well, some of your listeners and people viewing the show right now might be remembering that Charles Barkley once called himself a Republican, but a couple years ago he said, well, I used to be a Republican until the Republicans lost their damn minds. And I think yesterday he reflected that by speaking about how utterly toxic this law is, both for the state of Arizona and for the country. And look what that does for the discussion. I mean, on sports radio yesterday, they were debating the immigrant law. Steve Nash's quotes that you played have been played all over the country. And I think what's happened is because the organization as a whole came out against it, the owner, Robert Sarver, the general manager, Steve Kerr, numerous players saying publicly that they were against it, it's provided a degree of cover for everybody. And I want to make clear that I don't think the Suns would have done this if it wasn't for the protests that have been taking place wherever the Arizona Diamondbacks, the Major League Baseball team, have played. There have been protests in half a dozen cities since this law was passed, wherever the Diamondbacks play. And I don't think the Phoenix Suns wanted to be a pariah team like the D-backs.
And what about what's happening in baseball with the Major League Players Association making a strong statement last week, and some of the individual coaches and ball players?
Well, we've discussed this on Democracy Now! Before. Major League Baseball is incredibly reliant on Latin American talent. 27.7% of players come from Latin America. And therefore, numerous players have spoken out just about their own lives and their own families, and that they are actually fearful to go to Arizona. Big-time players like San Diego Padres first baseman Adrian Gonzalez or White Sox manager Ozzie Guillen, who was born in Venezuela, have both said that they will be boycotting the 2011 All-Star Game if it happens in Phoenix, Arizona. It really is remarkable.
Dave, when you go back to Arizona's history, one of the last states to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, what ultimately, among other things, pressured them to cave was that the Super Bowl was moved, to Pasadena, out of Arizona.
Right.
You've been calling for a boycott of the Diamondbacks of the All-Star Game in Arizona. How big is that movement?
Oh, I think it's very real. I mean, there have already been protests outside the stadiums in Denver, Colorado, in Chicago in front of Wrigley Field. There's a protest that's going to actually be quite huge, I believe, in Florida when the Diamondbacks go play the Florida Marlins. Already protests have been called for Citi Field in New York when the Diamondbacks play the Mets. And if there's one uniting theme to all of these protests, it's the simple message that says Arizona should not host the Midsummer Classic, the All-Star game, if SB 1070 is still on the books. And the idea that that idea has a backing among players and managers, prominent managers like Ozzie Guillen, gives it real weight. And I think Major League Baseball can be pushed to do this. Let's remember, you just mentioned the National Football League pulling the Super Bowl out of Arizona. No one's going to confuse the NFL with the IWW. They're hardly a radical organization, and that they were pushed to take that remarkable political step because of public pressure.
Dave, someone mentioned to me a couple of days ago a whole other angle on this issue of the pressure on professional sports, and especially baseball, that has not been addressed yet, which is that Budweiser beer is one of the main, if not the main, sponsors of advertisers on baseball and basketball and various other professional sports. And the single largest Budweiser distributor in America is the distributorship owned by Cindy McCain, of John McCain's wife. And obviously that many Budweiser beer also happens to be the main alcoholic beverage that Latinos drink across the country. So that enormous pressure could be brought to bear on Budweiser to put pressure on Major League Baseball to move that game out as well.
And people may not know that John and Cindy McCain were also minority owners of the Arizona Diamondbacks when Jerry Colangelo was the chief owner there. And Jerry Colangelo was the 2004 chairman of the Bush-Cheney campaign. So there are a lot of angles here by which to go about putting pressure on. And the current owner of the Diamondbacks, everybody should know this guy's name because he likes to live in the shadows. His name is Ken Kendrick Jr. He is one of the big bankrollers of the Arizona State Republican Party. And for that reason, above all else, the Arizona Diamondbacks should be a target for protest around the country.
Just some figures on the Arizona Diamondbacks, at least the executives of the Arizona Diamondbacks. In 2010, the National Republican Senatorial Committee's third highest contributor, the executives of the Arizona Diamondbacks, who gave $121,600. Furthermore, they also contributed $129,500, which ranked as the 18th highest contribution to the Republican Party committee. The team's boss, Ken Kendrick, and his family members, E.G. Kendrick Sr. and Randy Kendrick, made contributions to the Republicans totaling a staggering more than $1 million. Dave Zirin.
That is correct. And it's interesting because since the protests have started, Ken Kendrick released a statement through the team's PR director saying, on a personal level, I oppose SB 1070. And a lot of us are looking at that and saying, you know what, this is far too little too late. He's got to put his money where his mouth is. We're saying we want to see Ken Kendrick actually in front of cameras saying, you know what, the spigot has been turned off, and the state Republican Party will not get one more dime from my bottomless pockets until SB 1070 has finally been overturned.
So have you seen a comparable reaction in the world of sports to what you're seeing right here as a response to the Arizona anti-immigration law?
I mean, honestly, I really do believe you have to go back to the days when, with every fight, Muhammad Ali was fighting in a referendum on the Vietnam War and on the black freedom struggle in this country. And where you lined up politically affected how you stood in those fights when Muhammad Ali would face people like George Foreman or Joe Frazier, these epic fights. And when Ali would win, people who were against the Vietnam War felt emboldened. And when he lost, people who were actually for the war and against those draft-dodging hippies felt a little better about themselves that morning. I think we're dealing with something similar now. When Los Suns took the court last night, I was watching it with a bunch of friends, and all we were thinking was, we really want the Suns to win. Not because we're huge Steve Nash fans, but because we knew that if the Suns lost, all the commentary today would be, well, they lost because they were distracted by those politics, and that's why politics and sports don't mix. But the fact that they won, the fact that they played a gutsy game where they pulled together as a team, maybe people will draw different conclusions and say, hey, the team that stands together politically is the team that can also win on the court.
And Dave, what do you think the impact is on sports fans who are watching and hearing these players speak out this way, especially those who might not necessarily